neighbors and they get to know you. Reason number 2 is we can help diversify your distribution. With social media, it's really important to be able to have a wider audience. And Rogers TV can actually help complement your online presence by delivering to a different audience. And it's actually really easy to repurpose your existing content or to just create new material specifically tailored for community TV. And finally, reason number 3 is we can help enhance your credibility and your trust. And by aligning your brand with Rogers TV, you can tap into that trust that viewers have. This can boost your reputation, especially among viewers who favor local businesses and value community involvement. 1, 2, 3. It's that easy to build your local audience with Rogers TV.
Every year, dozens of Canadians are killed or seriously injured because they take risks around railway tracks. Talk to your loved ones about rail safety. Visit stoptracktragedies.ca.
You're watching Rogers TV. The following program was provided by a valued member of our local community. Rogers TV is proud to support local producers and share local voices, ideas, and opinions. For more information, please visit our website.
Hello, MB Polypod world. Thank you for tuning back for another week. We are 20 days from Election Day. But by the way, you can vote any day. I don't know why there was so much rhyming in that, but there was a lot of rhyming in that. You can vote any day at your local returning office, even outside of advanced polls. You can get mail-in ballots. You can get special ballots. So just make sure you vote. Make sure you get that done. You have until the 21st or 20 days outside, or 19 days. Where are we at now? Something like that. But yeah. And I want to first acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, the Maliseet, and the Pescatomakati, and the Wolastoq people. We are here in Medequist and St. John. Going to bring Sean Rouse in a little bit so we can do some banter about where we're at in this campaign. But first and foremost, we have a new entity on this earth.
Hi.
This is Joe and the little baby Beatrix.
She's hiding under here.
For those of you on podcast, you can't see, but we will post some pictures.
She might squawk at you for a minute. Yes. Hi. Yeah, she was born on Saturday, so we've been home for a couple of days now, and I won't be interrupting with any political commentary. Just wanted to.
Don't worry, Rogers TV. This is just a mandatory,
yes,
ratings booster for
cute
baby. So
have fun, you guys.
Thanks. All right, we're gonna bring in Sean. Hello, Sean.
Hello. How's it going?
Good. It's going great.
You were talking that you were getting some sleep. You're sleeping in 3-hour chunks, which is good from my own experience. I can, particularly with our first baby, it was, hour and a half at a time for months. So 3 hours at a time, I can appreciate it. So she's a very good baby.
Yeah, exactly. And all my kids, I've got a bunch of kids, right? I got this is my 5th. I know people are gonna be like, what? But Beatrix is great. She is Joe and I's little one, obviously, for those of you who don't know on the pod. So it's the MB Polypods, baby. It's crazy, It's full circle, our relationship. Ever since Joe and I met each other, we've been on the politics train since 2020. We both ran for the Greens when we would have met. So this is like the culmination of a relationship experience for us, and we're both very excited. But Beatrix came in at 8 pounds, 5 ounces, and 21 inches long. So pretty average of the track, a touch long. But how big were yours when they came, John?
Oh, gee, it's been so long. They're, between, I think the biggest would have been 8 and the smallest would have been 6 something. So
okay, yeah.
And now if you asked Amanda, she would know immediately the dimensions. I think it's just something moms commit to memory, and they get asked all the time. So
absolutely.
But for me, it wasn't important to me.
No, same.
How big they were.
Yeah, I
it's
agree.
It's not like sports. I don't memorize the stats.
That's right. Yeah.
Birthdays and
I don't remember my other kids' exact birth weights in either, so I 100% get it. But we're not here to talk about babies as much as they're fun.
Yes.
We're here to get on this New Brunswick election, NB Votes 2024. Right off the top, thank you to our Patreon supporters. We've seen a couple of donations come in. Really appreciate that. We got a second podcast out for you folks last week with Julia Woodhull-Melnick and Professor Julia Woodhull-Melnick at UNBSJ, Home RL, the housing lab there, as well as Dr. Tobin Haley LeBlanc. She was on. That was a great, informative pod. They really, put a knife into the Higgs government's approach, and we've seen as much of that. I guess that's a good place to start to follow up from that housing chat. We have seen some actual some national attention. I don't know. Do you follow Steve Boots, Sean?
I not religiously, but I do get to see quite a few of what he tweets or puts out on TikTok.
He put out two, pretty rare for him to do so, but he put out two this week. One on Sherry Wilson, which we'll talk about in a minute, but one on the housing piece. Let's pick up after the debate with the questions, and some of the, and then we'll get into the housing piece and take on that. The debate happened. The leaders are on the campaign trail after that. We both talked about what we thought needed to happen at those debates for those leaders to be in a good footing going forward. Why don't you start us off? Like, what were your observations about the debate? You had some warnings for David Kuhn. You had some warnings and some perspective for Higgs and Susan as well. So, like, what did you see? Where do you see things going?
Yeah, just reaction to the debate. I think David was wise. He didn't get into the kind of policy complications that are intrinsic in some of the proposals that he's been advocating.
Right.
Like, for example, the universal basic income. I think that is very complicated. Even the person who created it or helped create it at UPI, I heard call it a scheme. So it's not something you really want to... Yeah, I mean, I think he did it playfully, but at the same time, I mean, folks who are wary of it are going to hear that and say, it's too far out there. It's too new. I don't get it. And, it's going to frighten people away. So I think David just stayed with the basics, stayed with what's important to people and really focused in on that. For Higgs, I think he stood firm on his record. I think it was very clear what he wanted to say. I thought it was very candid at the end when he said, "People might not like me, but you need me." I mean, I think he really thinks that. I think no one likes me, but I'm doing the right thing for this province, and you need me. And I think, if you even look at the federal Liberals, I think they feel that way. It's like, you might not like us, but we're the best at what we're doing, and we need to be here. We're the right ones. You need us. You need me on that wall. You want me on that wall. You sleep better at night because I'm on that wall. Just a few good men. I think they really, get that, internalize that message that they're the only ones who can really make this happen, and without them the whole province would fall apart. I think that's probably a trapping of being in office for that long. And
governmentitis, they call it.
Yeah. And I mean, even Higgs, after he lost to Brian Gallant, it's the worst kept secret, he kind of tried to get back into government, managing them as a COO type role. I think he really thought he needed to be there, or the whole thing, all of his work was going to fall apart. And I think he still thinks that way. Susan, I think she was very reserved. It was funny. I watched both the English and the French debate. And when I was watching the English debate, I was thinking about your comments on how, that kind of nervous energy, that, that sort of very energetic and very strident kind of tone might be something that she needs to temper. And it's not something I'm so used to it. Honestly, when you made those comments, I said, I never really noticed that but somebody who really, maybe doesn't watch politics like we do, that is something that maybe would jump out at them.
It's over analyzing, but sometimes, you land, it's trying to get into the psyche of a person who doesn't know the nuance of the parties or the positions or the history of what's been going on. They're just chiming in, right? But what did you notice between the difference of the French and English?
Well, I thought that was very insightful. And then when I watched the English, when I noticed this sort of tone, it wasn't so animated
Hmm.
and I
She
don't want to
spent a
say
bit more time
performative.
reframing the question, like she didn't just jump into the response and list it all off. Like I noticed that she did that when she presented to some of the municipal councils when they asked her to come in. I mean, I was there for the one in St. John. I noticed the one in Moncton too. In this one, she spent a good 15 seconds, maybe not 15, maybe 8 seconds, just saying, good question. This is why it's an important question. You're asking that. And I think that maybe is a tactic to slow down, right? To really reframe the question, not revise the question. She didn't do any of that, or not as much. Some politicians, will say, that's a great question, and this is why we're really here to talk about this, and they're talking about something completely different, right? Um,
Yeah,
so
I
yeah.
would say her mannerism in English was very low and slow, just very
Hmm.
calm and cool and
Mm.
knowledgeable. All of it wasn't letter perfect, but it was nearly perfect. I don't think
Hmm.
she would have changed many of her answers. In
No.
French, it was the same old Susan, the same, talking with her hands and talking to the camera and being very energetic
Yeah.
and very animated. So
Mm.
I'm wondering if that was deliberate. I would imagine it was.
Mm.
That because it was too striking of a difference to not be intentional. But
Interesting.
yeah, just different ways of speaking for different audiences, and it was very
Yeah, the
effective.
French are the French do communicate differently too.
Yeah,
That
I mean, I
you're kind
think
of
they
right.
respond to that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and Higgs was very uncomfortable in French. I found
Hmm.
he was he gave all of his answers in English, except for Merci. He read an opening and closing statement in French
Hmm.
best he could. So he did. I think a lot of his answers were, he must have got the questions in advance and known what was coming because he had all of his answers ready. I don't think they came off the top of his head or anything like that.
Right.
And then David was also very good in French, and I thought he was effective. So I don't think anyone lost votes. I don't think anyone gained votes. I tweeted afterwards, whoever your favorite leader is the one who won, in your opinion. And I'm sure
Yeah.
that's the case.
I thought the Telegraph Journal had a great article about it. I don't know if you read that. They kind of said similar to you. Like nobody landed any knockout blows, but they did say if there was going to be a line of the night, it was that line that David said. Mr.
That
Higgs
was
has
a good
gone
line.
looking for trouble where trouble doesn't exist. He's not a problem solver. He's a problem maker. Um, and that was it wasn't a knockout blow because it came sort of right at the end of everything, but it was certainly a line of the night and memorable. I've talked to a few people since then. No, I think you're right. Nobody landed, and I think David needed to. Right, I think in order for us to see a Jack Layton type of moment, because the chessboard is set very similarly as it was for Jack Layton when he made a break and became official opposition um, leader, leader of the official opposition, sorry, in Parliament. Jack Layton didn't go in with sterling polling; like he was hovering around 20%. Same place David Kuhn is with the Greens here, federally, and all of a sudden in that debate, he turns to Michael Ignatieff and he says that famous line, most Canadians, Mr. Ignatieff, like he's giving a finger wag to Stephen Harper for running the country into the ground. And then he turns over and says, and you, sir, Mr. Michael Ignatieff, most Canadians don't believe they deserve a raise unless they show up for work. And you have the worst attendance record in this House. And I think it's time for Canadians to vote your party out. And Ignatieff was stumbling around after that. He couldn't find himself. It was a knockout blow, right?
Yeah.
Jack just
Oh,
took the night,
absolutely.
and he was the most articulate, the most energetic, and then they soared, right? And then I don't think we saw that. So yeah, I don't think
No.
we're not going to see a Jack Layton type of moment here in New Brunswick. But the chessboard was set for it heading into it.
I believe there's going to be another debate coming up. I'm not sure of the date,
CTV,
but
is it?
I thought it was Rogers and
Oh,
Brunswick
okay.
News coming up. So
Yeah,
in any case, if that happens, we'll find out, and
absolutely.
we'll have to watch to see if there's any difference in the messaging.
Yeah, yeah, and so that was my take. Susan, I thought my biggest complaint with Susan, and I guess the same complaint could be filed to a similar extent as David, but I thought his details were a little more there. I know what you're saying when you talk about getting into the minutia of policy. People get lost in that, and it doesn't, you miscommunicate and you lose sort of the edge of the conversation. I mean, the format just didn't allow for any sort of real
No.
debate. It was mostly statements that the leaders were making.
Well, I remember back in the 2018 where there was the format really promoted a lot of cross debate, and
Yes.
there was a point where, two, three, four leaders were literally talking all at the same time, and it was
Yeah.
just a mess. No points were made. It was very poorly received too by the public, I believe. So I think that it was intentional on the part of the CPC to make sure that that kind of crosstalk didn't happen. But at the same time, they whoever the main question was given to had a question, a chance to follow up at the end.
Yes.
If when they were
Yeah. I
criticized
didn't
by
mind
their
that as much. I
opponents.
thought that was kind of smart.
Yeah.
But you're right. The last debate you had Mackenzie Thompson for the NDP, you had Chris Austin for the People's Alliance, you had David Coon for the Greens, and you had Kevin Vickers and you had Blaine Higgs, and that's just so many people on the stage. I think because there was only three leaders there, which I think is smart. Just the leaders who have broken into the legislature, right? Like that's it.
Right.
That's where it should be. This idea, like at the federal level, of having Maxime Bernier there, it's like, well, he got just as many votes as the Green Party did for his party. Yeah, but he didn't win a seat. And Elizabeth May now has two, and that's different, right? But I do like that. I just think it could have benefited from a little bit less. Hey, we're going to cover a bunch of ground here on topics. We're going to narrow that ground, and we're really going to dive into some of the details, or at least to some extent.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, I agree that with limiting the amount of space, if you're 1 or 2% of the polls, what are you going to get at the end of a debate? Maybe a bump to 3 or 4 if you really do well. I mean, but what do we lose is, there's people who are trying to make their bones on there who don't have a prayer, and we can't really get to the meat of some of these serious issues. So
yeah.
I thought it was, I really did like the format, even though it had its limitations.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's it for me. The one thing that surprised me about, maybe, I don't know if you picked up on this. I didn't watch the French debate, so maybe it came out here. Nobody went for what I think is the jugular of the Progressive Conservative Party. Like, nobody came out. Susan alluded to it once in the English debate that I saw. My gosh, was it ever an empty net to score on? Right, to turn to Mr. Higgs and say on any question, Mr. Higgs, we've seen this on housing, we've seen this on this issue. Like, no matter the issue, Mr. Higgs has run into serious, contentious engagement with his own MLAs, and nobody really nailed that down and continued to make the point. You've lost more MLAs than any other premier since Richard Hatfield, and we've talked about that in the pod before. The people of New Brunswick are soon to reward you with what is a failed experiment in leadership in this province, and your own MLAs and your own party has called for your resignation. And not that you wanted to spend you have 60 seconds to answer. You don't want to spend more than 6 or 7 seconds, but making that point 3 or 4 times during the night, to me, would have been a smart move, and no one really made it.
I think that was probably calculated, and just to play devil's advocate to your point, I think that's right. I think it would have made a point. I think it's maybe they made the calculation that that's something that people already sort of internalized. And if you're watching the debate, you probably already know that. And I think she really is sort of playing a front runners type of game where she doesn't want to make any mistakes or lose any support or look too arrogant.
Right.
And I think that might have come off to the wrong way to some people, and maybe cost her some support. So
Hmm.
as much, I don't know, it's one of those calls you have to make depending on how things are going. And I think probably they stayed away from it for that reason, in my opinion.
That's a good point. Yeah. Well, anyway, that's the debate. So then on to housing now. And I think this goes to your point that you're making there, but running a front runners game and making some calculations and some strategic calls, right, about how you communicate during a campaign. Those things matter, and they resonate with people differently, right? You know that we know some of the old adages, like anybody who's doing well or like in first place or even second place, if you're seen punching down on other parties, and really dunking on them, it actually there's a point where you turn a corner and you're seen as a bully, right? Um, and so that doesn't play well, and you gotta be careful. Like if people view you as being quite popular or quite in the lead in the front runner position, as you say, you got to be careful about how you speak to others, because it can come across, like you say, arrogant. But one of the things that occurs to me on housing, there is such an open net on housing to score on, because and I mentioned Steve Boots earlier. He was on there making the point about on TikTok and Twitter and all of his platforms. He got lots of followers across the country. He's in Saskatchewan, I think, is where he lives.
Yes.
Yeah. And anyway, and he's talking about Higgs and saying, look, like these guys aren't a serious party. Their own housing strategy, the goals of it aren't being met. And here they are. And Jill Green was recently featured this week, kind of talking about this, have no intention of releasing anything new, have no intention of, stopping the profiteering on tenants in this province with massive rent hikes. They have no intention of reforming or changing anything that they've already announced.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, their own goals aren't being achieved for housing starts, and money isn't being spent for social housing like they promised. So it's like, to me, that is the empty net, right? There's no goalie even there. Like nobody's even trying to play defense for the government. And when we look at the other parties, what we see are a lot of statements about what they want to do. But I kind of compare it this way, right? Like it's one thing to say you're going to mow the lawn, and I said this to Julia and Tobin as well. It's one thing to say you're going to mow the lawn. It's another thing to say when you're going to do it, and it's another thing to say how you're going to do it, right? If you say I'm going to mow the lawn at 6 o'clock with a pair of scissors, people are pretty clear that that's going to take you a long time, right? But if you say I'm going to get on the ride on and use this tool at 6 o'clock, you got a good expectation when something's going to get done. There isn't anything deeply detailed in either of the Greens or Liberal platforms on housing, and I just wonder why.
That's a good question. I think they're really relying on the federal partnerships to make that work.
Right.
And this is a topic you understand a lot better than me from a nuts and bolts standpoint. So I'll take all your leads on this one. But I think they really do, at least from the conservative standpoint, believe that the government should not be playing in this area. That this is something that should be private sector. There should be no provincially owned housing. Let the free market reign. At least from Blaine's point of view, I think he really does believe in those base market forces. And yeah, there'll be spikes, and the market will work itself out. It'll get to an equilibrium over time, and in the meantime, government has a very limited role to play, and cushioning those blows. That's just life, and government can't do everything, and can't get its fingers into everything, because if you start that, you never stop. And we saw that with the rent cap. They did it for 1 year and then backed away from it, whereas in other provinces, rent caps are perennial. They're always
it's
there.
pretty much the norm everywhere else.
Right. So this is I think, really keeping in with Blaine's philosophy, I think, on the topic. And as for the other two parties, I think maybe we'll see more as the campaign unfolds. There might be more announcements coming where we still have a lot of campaign left, but it is a topic that's close to home for a lot of people right now. It's ranking in the top of the polling, not at the very top, but in the top 5. So it's something that's on people's minds. It's also linked with the affordability issue, which is the number 1 in the polls. So it's something that I think people want to hear a message on, not just about. I know Susan's talked about taking PST off of bills. I don't know if people understand what that means from their own point of view.
Right.
So I think there's more talking that needs to be done on that point.
Yeah, and I think your point around communications is why I want to drill into that, because if there's a strategy at play for the Liberals and the Greens, and as they try to break into government, or make serious inroads on their seat counts, that strategy is probably going to play out across. It's going to be continuous. It's not going to be, oh, we're going to apply this strategy here for this issue and do this over there. They're going to want to have some conformity and some discipline around their messaging, and it tells me that I think there is a belief. I don't know. It seems like there's a belief that they don't have to do much to convince people that the government isn't working, and this is why I think this one kind of shows this, because if you really thought the government had a chance to form government again, if you were the Liberals or the Greens, and you were really worried about the PCs forming government, like having enough ability to do that, it strikes me that there would be a lot more, wedge points. The rent cap is a wedge issue, sure, but yeah, you're talking about the discipline of Blaine Higgs to support the free market enterprise around housing, versus, but that's also on display when Susan says we're just going to take some sales tax off, right? It's the idea that, and that, because that rewards everybody, whether you're nonprofit or for profit. It's like you are equally, actually, as a matter of fact, if anything, it supports the big players more than the little players, because their dollar figures are going to be much higher because they buy much more, right? And so that's going to leave more money on the table for big players in housing than it is smaller ones. So yeah, it's like, do you think that there's a bit of an assumption in the mechanisms of these parties that the Conservatives just don't have a chance to form government, and therefore they don't need to play that wedge issue game on all these things, that they can more or less put some important issues out in front of people and see where the cards play? I don't know. It's hard for me I can see both of those, but I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, again, I'll take your lead on this. Just for you hear things when they speak that I don't, because I'm not as aware of the mechanics of the policy as you are.
Right.
But I don't think housing per se is a topic that they're really shooting on as much as overall affordability. If affordability overall is managed better, and there are targeted cost reductions in how much people have to pay make ends meet every month, then that's going to help manage the overall cost of rent, for example. But the availability of housing is a big issue, as you know. And what can governments do to promote that? And we know the PCs have been talking about rolling out funding and programs to help in motivate builders to build new housing and to get new buildings built. And I know Julia knows a lot about that. I don't know. I haven't heard a good message yet, and that's maybe something. I think that's probably a topic that both parties, or maybe all parties, don't understand.
They're uncomfortable.
Well.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think you're
complicated.
It is complicated. And, I've heard David Hurley talk about this on his pod. He's done multiple, big conversations on the Hurley Burley podcast on housing specifically. And, one of the things he keeps saying, he's like, I hear everything you're saying, but I still can't get my hands around this issue. I simplify it a lot when I think about it, right? What did we do before to solve the crisis, and what are we doing right now? But I suppose you're probably right. The calculus here is that we don't need to put a lot of details in the window, because the majority of people don't understand what the problem is, and they certainly don't understand what the solutions are. You have mutants like me that have made it their life's purpose to try to
and thank God we have people like you who are really trying to push the envelope here. But
I would say at this point, I find it very difficult to build consensus around housing reform.
Absolutely.
As much as I could stand up and talk about it for an hour and explain, what it is that's in the way and how this is failing, and going through this right now, trying to navigate the various government programs that do exist as a nonprofit actor myself with our project. So I understand it very well, but I see your point, right? Like, the parties are uncomfortable with it. I get the sense that, in many ways, I would expect the Greens to really run with progressive housing policy, like we've seen other Green parties do in Germany and Switzerland and European examples of their own party, which is an international party with its own sort of combined constitution that governs Green parties everywhere. But they haven't, right? I think there is a real fear that we don't want to piss off the private sector in New Brunswick.
I think that's true.
And I think that's where the parties are on that. It's probably, like you say, a calculated effort to say some things, to make some points about affordability, and that PST, cutting the provincial sales tax off of building materials for projects, that speaks exactly to that. That's affordability. A rent cap, that's controlling affordability, right? So, anyway, we can move on to the next topic, but I do,
You're right, though. It doesn't address the supply, which is one of the central issues that needs to be addressed. And that's where we need help from people like Julia, who understand this really well. Her cohorts.
Yeah. Okay. So the big issues that are coming out right now. Actually, before we get to that, before we get to Kim Costain's piece in the media, before we get to Fatine Grasecci and Sherry Wilson and all these, we do have to say we made a couple of errors when we were going through the riding of St. Croix with Mark Grulot and Troy Lyons. I indicated that Troy had a PhD in science, had done some work at the St. Andrews Biological Station over 20 years. He has done that, but he only has a master's degree. So that is my error. His employment history extends back 30 years in project management. It's been multidisciplinary in agriculture, fisheries, environmental sector. He worked with provincial Department of Environment and Local Government. So I was almost right, but I did accredit him as a PhD, a doctor in the field. He's not. And Mark is not a pastor. He is a minister. And those are two different things. A pastor is somebody who's ordained by a denomination to oversee a church, a local church in many ways, or to be pastoral in their ministry, in some way, shape, or form. And that comes with an ordination. If you're one of the more mainline denominations, the old school ones, that's a bishop coming and laying hands on you and credentialing you through a divinity school with a master's, usually in divinity, to get that. But a minister can be anybody who has sort of some specific training, possibly a specific degree, and who just sort of works in and around the church world. So I should have known better on that nuance because I worked in the church for so long, but I really didn't. I thought he was a pastor. He has a business. He officiates weddings all across New Brunswick. He's a member of the St. Stephen Chamber of Commerce. So anyway, my error there.
And I said to Brent before we started recording, I honestly couldn't explain the difference if if you made me if you put a gun to my head, I couldn't have told you the difference between a pastor and a minister. So that's just and I'm sure we've made many more mistakes.
Yeah.
I think I said on Twitter, I think we bit off a lot, maybe more than we could chew, trying to go through every riding and every candidate, and we did fall short in a couple places. And
Yeah.
hopefully, we didn't make more errors. But if you heard them and you say, I didn't really get a fair shake,
Let us know.
feel free to shout out, and we'll try to clean it up a little bit.
Yep. Is there anything you would change so far? Are any observations from the predictions we've made? Anything that's happened where you're like, ooh, I think that maybe this toss-up that I was calling has changed dramatically now?
I don't think so. I think all the toss-ups, there were 6 or 7 that we said were toss-ups, and I still think there are. I don't think there's any that have fallen solidly on either side just over the past few days or few weeks, depending on which riding we're talking about. I know Blaine is feeling the pressure now, obviously. We're seeing rumors, and some people say they're rumors, some people say they're absolute fact and swear it on a Bible, and that there's a lot more dirty tricks. We're seeing signs taken down, we're seeing signs destroyed. There's a lot of very intense, I would say, feelings on both sides. People are starting to sense a bit of desperation from the Tories trying to, gain some ground. I think whatever polling they're doing internally, they can see that it's not going their way right now, or they at least haven't convinced anyone new to come to their side. And Blaine has had the same strategy every single election he's been leader. I'm not going to promise anything. With one notable exception this time around, the HSD cut. I'm not going to promise anything except doing what I'm doing. Keep balanced budgets, keep paying down the debt, keep programs funded, but not just throwing money at them. And I think I was really surprised, as adverse as people seem to be to deficit budgets. There was a narrative poll, and the TJ is rolling this out in small parts. There was, I think, 10 questions on that poll, and they've only talked about a few so far. But one of the ones was around healthcare, and would you be in favor of deficit spending to improve healthcare? And the answer was yes. Yeah, we don't care about the deficits. We want better healthcare. So that sort of goes against the conventional wisdom of, I'd say, a lot of people that who are advocating for balanced budgets. And, people want the services. People want to feel like they have safety when they go to the hospital. They want to feel like their nurse hasn't been awake for 24 hours straight, and they know and have confidence in the social fabric that's been established by the government out there. They don't care so much about the deficits, and that's, of course, completely contrary to the entire campaign tack that Blaine has taken so far. Is say, we're great because we balanced the budget and paid down the deficit $3 billion. Or the debt, rather, $3 billion over the past 6 years. And people, great, cool, but look at the toll.
Yes. And what can we say about, like, the only, and this is, I think, where we're at on that front. This is a change cycle, right? It is like clockwork. Every time a government tries to go for a third term, doesn't matter who you are, federal, provincial, municipal, if you're a mayor, if you're a councillor, every third time is a change cycle where people are asking the question, okay, they've been there a while. Do I need change in my life? Is anything wrong? How substantial? And in times of prosperity or times of hardship, it doesn't really matter, right? Same kind of deal. And so the only way to blunt that natural force that exists in politics for a change cycle, it's funny because the Americans sort of institutionalized the change cycle, right? where if you're a president, you can only get 2 terms. It's not even possible for you to try for a third. Other countries, that's not the case. In Canada, we see some of the longest serving leaders of parties and premiers in Westminster style politics, right? And here in New Brunswick, that is a natural force, just like everywhere else. Blaine Higgs is going through it. He knows he has to make the case that the change that is being proposed is unbearable. Like, that's the only way to win that argument, to blunt that force, is to make the case that the change being proposed by the other party or parties is unbearable, and that's expensive, because it's what do they call it, a scorched earth style advertising campaign to really, and you see it, right? They're trying to tie Justin Trudeau to Susan Holt, trying to tie Jagmeet Singh to David Kuhn. They're trying to do everything they can to scorch the earth and to say these guys are going to kill us if they get in power, right? They are doing that game. But here are there rumors now coming out that Steve Outhouse has been fired. You've got 3 candidates in the, all over the news. It's not just New Brunswick news. Sherry Wilson, her comments about Indigenous, National Indigenous Day, getting picked up everywhere. Kim Costain's, TikTok and, dance videos, sure, they're harmless. We've talked about it on the pod before, but those are being picked up, and people are making the comparison, say, isn't she running for the party that is canceling sex ed? And isn't she running for the party that is trying to, like, how does she find this helpful for her? Like, sure, you can say, like, I know she made a comment. She said, look, we've all done things in the past that we regret. And it's like, yeah, but do you regret it? Like, I mean, you didn't tell anybody about it. You haven't tried to explain it. You just said you tried to delete everything, and then everybody found it, and now you're wearing it. And Faytine is the most recent one to reemerge. Her videos are coming from all over the place. Like, I think you're right. Blaine has to be feeling that pressure, having 3 candidates under fire for just these crazy sort of situations.
Yeah, you covered a lot of points there. So, and we'll likely talk about each of them in more detail. But
Yeah,
just that first one around the base appeal, I think you're right. They're saying, if we don't oppose the Liberals, if we don't oppose the Greens, they're going to form a coalition, and we're going to get in trouble, just like we have in Ottawa with the NDP
right.
Conservative coalition, or sorry, NDP Liberal coalition against the Conservatives. I think there's a section of the population out there that say, don't threaten me with a good time. I mean, I would love to have a Liberal minority with the Greens and balance of power. That would be awesome. There are, I'd say it's a very small fraction of the population who would find that threatening, and it's the conservative base. So I think it's a message to excite and invigorate the conservative base when they make that threat, just to make sure those, and if they're not already incited and all mad and angry and head for the polls anyways, I don't know why that would be the thing that tips them over. But
yeah,
just
it's true.
Like firing everything at them to make sure, like, for God's sake, get to the polls, or it's the end of the world as we know it.
Yeah.
So that's the target there. So
Yep.
and just to so there were, and you mentioned all of them, I think, more scandals that came out this week. And scandals, I use the word advisedly. I mean, it's New Brunswick, but Kim Costain did have another video hit the internet. I think it was in the last couple of days. Just and again, it's the same kind of, this is just me having fun. This is just. I heard the term box wine mom, which I guess is a term on TikTok.
Yeah.
Or box wine aunt. Sorry, that's the term.
Right.
And, she's everybody's favorite box wine aunt, because that's kind of zany stuff that box wine aunts do. Anyway, and I don't want to be accused of being a misogynist. That's just the commentary I've heard, and
absolutely.
And I think it's the videos are fine. They're funny. I think she means no harm in them, obviously. She gained a huge following on TikTok by posting them. I think, that might make a very small segment of the population think twice about voting for her. Most people will just see it as background noise, I think. I don't know. I think she's handling it quite well. And she should stick up for herself if she thinks, those are great videos. I don't know why she deleted them all and then deleted her channel, but she's obviously not proud of them. And
Yeah, and that's to me the big thing. Like I ran into this myself when I ran 2020, and people have major concerns. And of course, you can hear Babe Beatrix in the background. It's always fun. But yeah, I had major backlash from what I would call the left Twitter sphere, who really came after me saying, this guy's an evangelical pro-life Christian. He's not really progressive. He's this, that, and stuff. No. And I didn't delete a single thing. I didn't delete a Facebook post from 2012 when I was more ultra religious and more charismatic. And I see posts come up and I'm like, I'm never going to delete that stuff. And I think, the calculus is there is to say, look, I've evolved, I've changed, and my opinions changed on this stuff. And so if her opinions changed, that's good. But I'm very disillusioned with some of it all, to be honest, because I do think it is inappropriate, her content, only in as far as you're now seeking office and you have to be seen as being honest with people. And in a time when democracy is more and more under attack, in a time when people are willing to sideline democratic institutions to get, people in power like Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu and these folks, it is paramount that we have local candidates and politicians to say, you know what, I'm going to stand for our institutions. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be as transparent as I can. And I think when you don't do that, when you bury your head in the sand, and I mean, don't get me wrong, there's going to be a lot of candidates, there's going to be a lot of progressive conservatives that will just vote for the PCs no matter what. But if you run a campaign like that, and you win a campaign on a foundation of dishonesty, I just think it does serious damage to the rest of the system and the structure and the trust. And I think that is really important for us to get back. So that's why I find it inappropriate. I don't find the content, offensive. Yeah, she uses the N-word. Yeah, she, swearing on there and blah, blah, blah. But yeah. And then there's, of course, Fatine, who we've talked about. And we're seeing that picked up pretty wide and far as well.
Yeah, just to finish on Kim, I'm
sure.
not going to clutch my pearls and say that, that's something that, she shouldn't be talking about. It is a plus 18 channel. It is talking about things that are not suitable for kids. I think we can all agree on that, on a platform where there's a lot of kids. And, she talked about, don't come to my channel if you're over 18. I think we know how that works on the internet. So people can make judgments based on that if they wish. But I think the funniest part is she's just running for, the thirsty for the talk, furious premier, who blew his top earlier this year over one slide in an HPV presentation that, was promoting a sex ed site to kids. And then here's someone making plus 18 videos about, sexy topics and just putting it out there. And, there is a big disconnect between those two things that's humorous. I mean, it's funny. And, and we're not going to pretend it's not funny. You want to be the sexy TikTok star, and you've got Blaine, furious Blaine clutching his pearls over sex ed. I mean, that's funny, seeing those two in the same camp. That's just it. I think that's where we need to focus when it comes to that story. Just around Fatine, Fatine again has a lot of videos out there. I think people are getting to know her. There is, word on the street is she is in the lead in the Hampton riding. That she's doing quite well. Yeah. She's
Wow.
doing quite well there, and she's probably got the advantage. I think the vote is being split a bit between Laura and John, unfortunately, which we saw happening,
Mhm.
and it's favoring Fatine. There is I think she's effectively taken, what is, I think, arguably a Christian nationalist message and framed it in such a way that she's being persecuted for her religious beliefs, which,
Mm.
we've talked about this before. I don't think she's being persecuted for religious beliefs. There are people who are opposing her because she's talking about, and has talked about for years, putting her religious beliefs into laws that apply to everybody,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is what we call Christian nationalism. That is the
Yes.
dictionary definition of Christian nationalism. And
Yeah.
many people object to that for obvious reasons. So,
Mhm.
but I do think she's been successful in blunting that criticism. So if, that riding has got to put the work in if they want to win, I think she's got the advantage there.
You're right. Canada 338 calls this a safe riding for the PCs, right? And I, the problem I have is that you can't tell me that the party infrastructure that Gary Crossman lost and the mess that caused won't collapse the vote by at least 5 points, like at least five
Sure.
points. And so, like, even if we're as conservative can be in our analysis, pollsters don't get to analyze, right? They don't get to do this kind of work that we're doing here. But the polls don't show a drop, right? When you see Gary Crossman in 2020, I'm just trying to find that number. Yeah, in 2020, they got 60 points, right, of support with Gary. Right now, the margin of error on the PC vote is 55 plus 8%, plus or minus 8%, right? I mean, I guess that's a 5-point loss. In some cases, maybe, but it also has the potential that she's going to do better with that vote than Gary. I just can't believe it. Like, I just don't think there's that many people who are that unaware, who are that devoted to um, the PC party after Gary, and everything that happened with their attempt to put their candidate. I mean, they were mobilized to run a contested nomination against Fatine and then dropped out and quite, clearly said, we cannot run the way this party is being organized by people like Erica Hashi and we've talked about them before, right? In that riding association management by the president, Erica Hashi. Like, they just said, look, there's no point. It's a foregone conclusion, so we're done. And that's Gary and a local councilor. So it just is hard for me to believe that many people are that unaware that the vote split will be that, um, a big of a deal with someone like Haron, who has represented this area in the past. It's hard. So I don't know what
Yeah.
your thoughts on it are. I mean,
Well,
I'm not on
18
the
want
ground in Hampton all the time, but
No, Grisashi wants this bad, and she's doing the work. She's knocking on every door. She's making phone calls 12 hours a day, personally. Uh, she's taking all the lumps that you take when you go and put yourself out there, and she's keeping going. And I'm not saying the other people aren't working, but I don't think they're working as hard as she is. And
mm,
unless you get out there and ask for the vote the way she is, I think they're going to lose.
mm,
So she's definitely got some momentum, I believe, in that riding right now.
mm.
So they need to get out there.
Interesting. The PC vote overall in the St. John region, which includes Hampton, is considered above 50%, and it is dropping ever so slightly, and Liberals are rising. But it doesn't. They're saying there's two toss-ups here. There's PC leaning in one, likely in the one, and four safe. They're saying on Canada 338, they're saying that Portland Simons and St. John Harbor are toss-ups, and yeah, like these are places, and like Lancaster's likely, and Peace and St. John East is leaning, and it's just like these are places where the last MLA took off. I guess it's like, until I'm proven otherwise, I think that's a big hit for a party that can't necessarily be reflected in the polls when you lose incumbent PC MLAs and cabinet ministers like that, like Dorothy and Trevor, especially been there a long time. It's just, I have a hard time trusting the polls when that's in the background, right?
So we've got about 6
5
minutes left
Yep.
here. So go on to Sherry Wilson. I mean,
Yes.
Who has tire tracks on her back from being thrown under the bus.
Yeah, what do you see?
Deservedly. Well, and as most people probably heard the story where she put out a statement on the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, equating what happened with that tragedy, that horrific tragedy, with the parental rights anti-trans message. And that's something we've seen before. Grisashi did the same thing previously, and in a few videos that have been found online. But she did it on the day in a very public way, and was called out on it, and deservedly so. I mean, someone who thinks those two things, sticking up for unsupported trans kids at school and Soji education are the same thing as what happened at the residential schools, is completely disconnected from reality. And anyone who would make that kind of argument, I think, has serious suitability concerns from me for being an MLA, serious lapse of judgment, serious, might not, someone I would think of as not living on the same planet that I live on. That's how far away those things are. So, and Higgs realized it, and she withdrew the post. There's probably a phone call to her to take that down, and Higgs can't afford to lose anybody right now, so she's still there. And as of yesterday, they can't change candidates anymore.
No, that's it. She's locked in. She's on the ballot.
Yeah, she's a former cabinet minister. She's popular in her riding. He can't afford to lose her, so he's tied to her for better or worse right now, just like all the other MLA candidates that he's having problems with. But she certainly deserves all the flack she's getting, and again, just really disconnected in every way from, in a way that makes a lot of people seriously question her judgment, and I think deservedly so. There's a very serious, tragedy and a policy issue. Equating those two things the same way Grisashi equated them. Anyone who lives in a world where those two things are equivalent, I think really has some problems with reality perception.
Yeah, you're either engaged in an underhanded, revisionist history manipulation tactic, which is nefarious and evil, in some eyes, or you're that incompetent, you're that, out of touch, and you're that, you're lacking that much intelligence and insight on these issues that you can say things sort of so, genuinely, but in such a really problematic way. You looked at Moncton South. I do believe we called this a toss-up. It's still a toss-up. We don't have. I mean, the thing is you're not getting a lot of polls in Canada 338 by anybody here, right? Like,
no,
this is a projection that Canada 338 gives us, but we're not getting a lot of active polls to fill in the details on this projection. And we're seeing a plus minus for 7% for the Libs of 37% support in Moncton South, and plus 8% for the PCs at 39%. It's
Albert. Just before we get called out, Albert Riverview is the riding.
Sorry, that's Moncton South's what it used to be, right?
I did get another correction, but yeah, exactly.
Yes, my mistake. Yeah, but Moncton's 6 districts are looking like a potentially a 3 to 5 win for the Liberals and a 2-4 on Canada 338. I gave one riding here to the Greens, Jacques Giguère, and I still think there is some game to be played left there, but we'll see.
I think there's some subtle racism, and I'm just going to say it. That
Yeah.
subtle racism, it's dog whistling. And
Yes.
I think there's a lot of PCs out there who don't, a lot of, and maybe PCs is the wrong way to say it, a lot of people on the right side of the political spectrum who questioned the legitimacy of the Truth and Reconciliation Day. And I think, Steve Outhouse and the political operatives are deliberately dog whistling that to try and get votes. And in this case, it backfired. They took it too far.
Agreed. Well, we're out of time. I thank you again, Sean, for another great week. Lots to talk about, lots of analysis to give, and we'll be back at least in 1 week time to do another one of these, a couple more times before the election. If not, maybe there's a chance we can have another MB Polypod. I don't think it'll be this week for an extra one, just because we're in baby world over here. But yeah, thanks again, and have a good day.
You too. Thanks, everyone.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com. This is Rogers TV.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Welcome to Miramichi Songwriters. I'm your host, Terry Whalen. So happy to be here at James M. Hill Memorial High School in Miramichi in their digital media studio. This is a studio where I get to teach a 2-credit course to grade 11, 12 students on songwriting and recording. So it's kind of been a dream for me to be able to do that. It's been a wonderful experience working with young singer-songwriters and musicians. Who knows where the future is for those young people. Anyway, I'm so happy to be